They told Ethan that heroes only existed in movies, but he learned the truth the day he almost died saving someone else. The morning air in Brooklyn felt heavy, pressing against his thin shoulders as he hurried down cracked sidewalks littered with yesterday's trash and half-forgotten dreams. He clutched the old watch in his pocket, his father's watch, a piece of metal and glass that had stopped ticking long ago, yet somehow it kept his heart beating. Every day felt the same. His mother Helen leaving before dawn to work endless shifts at the laundromat, his school uniform still smelling faintly of soap and old coins, the sting of whispers about his father echoing down the hallways. They said Daniel Carter was a thief, a liar, a man unworthy of love. But Ethan knew the truth lived in that watch and the gentle lessons his father whispered before prison bars swallowed him whole. Justice isn't something you wait for, Ethan. It's something you fight for. He repeated those words in his head like a secret prayer, each syllable stitching his hope back together. That morning, he crossed Atlantic Avenue on his way to school, the rush of horns and yelling drivers wrapping around him like an angry river. His eyes darted to a familiar figure in the street, Officer Rebecca Lawson, standing firm in the middle of chaos, her hand raised to stop the roaring traffic. She looked different today, exhausted. Her hand pressed protectively over her round belly. Ethan's chest tightened. She shouldn't be here, then it happened. A cyclist barreled down the street, wobbling wildly, his eyes wide with panic. The crowd shrieked, some lifting their phones, but no one moved. Rebecca didn't see it coming. Ethan's mind split open in that moment, fear and instinct flooding him like a broken dam. Run. His legs launched forward, the city sounds drowning under the pounding of his heart. "Ma'am." "Watch out." Rebecca turned just in time to meet his terrified eyes. Ethan threw himself forward, shoving her aside with every ounce of his small body. They tumbled together onto the sidewalk as the bike crashed to the ground inches from where she had stood. Rebecca gasped, her hand immediately cradling her belly, her breath ragged. Ethan scrambled up, his own chest heaving, eyes darting wildly for danger. "Are you hurt? Are you okay?" Rebecca's lips trembled as she looked at him, a boy, small and shaking, standing like a shield in front of her. "Thank you." Ethan didn't answer. The watch in his pocket felt warm against his skin, as if his father was holding him from somewhere beyond those prison walls. In that heartbeat, Ethan didn't feel like a scared boy anymore. He felt like someone who could change the world. They told Ethan that heroes only existed on movie screens, but that morning, he discovered the aching weight of real courage under his own skin. He woke up to the echo of his mother's footsteps in the narrow hallway, her tired voice humming a gospel tune that clung to the walls like a fragile prayer. The smell of cheap coffee drifted in from the kitchen, mixing with the cold air leaking through cracked windows. Ethan lay there for a moment, listening to the city outside waking up in angry car horns and distant sirens. In the corner of his small room sat a faded backpack, half-zipped, filled with worn notebooks and a sandwich wrapped in plastic. Ethan slid his hand into his pocket, feeling for the old watch, his father's watch, the only thing that still felt alive from the man he missed every second of every day. "Get up, Ethan. Don't be late." His mother's voice sounded softer now, almost breaking. Ethan stood, dressed quickly, and stepped into the hallway. His mother, Helen, stood in her laundromat uniform, dark circles heavy under her eyes. She handed him a banana without looking directly at him. "Eat this and—" "Be careful today." He nodded, taking the banana, his fingers brushing hers for a second longer than usual. She pulled away first. Outside, Brooklyn pulsed like a living animal, steam rising from manholes, vendors yelling about bagels and hot dogs, the rhythm of sneakers slapping against concrete. Ethan moved through the maze, ducking under scaffolding, sidestepping puddles that smelled of gasoline and rain. He kept one hand pressed to his pocket, checking the watch again and again, as if it were a talisman against everything ugly in the world. Daniel Carter wasn't a criminal. His father was the kind of man who would fix broken bikes for neighbor kids and read bedtime stories until Ethan fell asleep on his chest. But all of that shattered when police took Daniel away, sirens screaming like dying wolves in the night. Ethan had replayed that night 1,000 times in his mind. the shock in his father's eyes, his mother screaming, the neighbors staring. Today, like every day, he carried that invisible weight on his small shoulders. As he neared the intersection, Ethan spotted her, Officer Rebecca Lawson. Her neon vest glowed under the early sun, her hands cutting through the air with authority. But something looked wrong. She seemed pale, one hand resting protectively on her round belly. She shouldn't be here today. Ethan slowed, heart thudding louder than the traffic around him. A shout sliced through the noise. "Look out!" A man on a bike rocketed toward Rebecca, his face twisted in terror, his hands jerking uselessly at the handlebars. Time cracked open, people froze, phones came up to record. No one moved. Ethan's feet exploded forward before his mind could catch up. "Ma'am, watch out!" Rebecca turned, confusion and fear crashing across her face. Ethan slammed into her side, pushing her hard enough that they both tumbled onto the curb. Her hand flew to her belly as they landed, her breath exploding from her lungs. The bike skidded past, metal screaming against concrete, crashing into a parked car. Ethan's knees scraped against the pavement. He scrambled upright, scanning her quickly. "Are you okay? Is the baby okay?" Rebecca's eyes filled with tears as she stared at the boy who had just saved her life. I think I'm okay." He reached out a trembling hand to steady her, his fingers barely touching her arm. She took a slow breath, looked around at the silent, stunned crowd now gathering. "Thank you." Ethan shook his head, swallowing the panic still clawing at his throat. "I had to, you couldn't move in time." Rebecca tried to stand but wobbled. Ethan caught her elbow, holding her as steady as he could despite his own shaking legs. "Sit down, please, just for a moment." She sat on the curb, still cradling her stomach, her breathing ragged. Around them, voices began to murmur. A man stepped forward, frowning. "What's this kid doing? Trouble again?" Ethan ignored the stares, focused only on Rebecca. "Are you sure you're okay? Should I call someone?" Before she could answer, a powerful voice cut through the air. "Rebecca, are you hurt?" A tall man in a police uniform pushed through the crowd, Jack Lawson. His face, lined with worry, softened slightly when he saw his wife safe. "I'm fine. This boy. He saved me." Jack turned his eyes on Ethan, hard at first, then softening as he took in the boy's wide, fearful eyes and scratched knees. "What's your name, son?" "Ethan." Jack knelt, placing a heavy hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Ethan, you saved my family today. Thank you isn't enough." Ethan's lips parted, but no words came. In his pocket, the watch pressed against his skin like a heartbeat. He didn't know it yet, but this moment would echo far beyond this broken street corner. It would ripple through the lives of everyone he loved and change his own fate forever. The small crowd around the intersection seemed to pulse with energy, whispers rolling like waves as Jack's hand remained firm on Ethan's shoulder. Rebecca sat on the curb, her breathing slowly steadying. She looked up at Ethan with a soft, trembling smile, one hand still pressed protectively to her belly. "Thank you, really, thank you." Ethan's eyes flickered down to his torn knees, his fingers trembling at his sides. He didn't know what to say, the words knotting in his throat like vines. Jack glanced at the gathering onlookers, his jaw tight. Then he turned back to Ethan, his eyes searching, as if trying to read every hidden thought behind the boy's wide, scared gaze. "You didn't have to do that, but you did." Ethan shifted his weight, clutching the straps of his backpack. I couldn't let her get hurt." Jack nodded slowly. For a moment, silence settled between them, the noise of traffic fading into a distant hum. "You saved 2 lives today, my wife and my child. I owe you." Ethan felt his pulse hammer in his ears. He glanced at Rebecca, then back at Jack. His lips parted. I don't want anything for me." Jack blinked, surprised, his eyebrows rising slightly. "What do you mean anything? Name it." Ethan's fingers curled tighter around the strap, his nails digging into the worn fabric. The words that had weighed on his chest for so long finally broke free. I want you to look into my dad's case." Jack's expression froze. Rebecca's head snapped up, her eyes darting between Ethan and her husband. "My dad, Daniel Carter, he's in prison. But he didn't do it. He didn't steal anything. He's innocent." Ethan's voice wavered, every syllable trembling on the edge of breaking. The crowd shifted, some people frowning, some leaning in closer. "Please, you're the police chief. You can help him, please." Jack's jaw tensed, his eyes narrowing slightly as he processed the plea. He stood, drawing in a long, slow breath. Daniel Carter. I remember that case. Ethan nodded desperately, his eyes glistening. They said they had proof. But it wasn't him. He was home that night. He left his watch at home. But in the video, the man was wearing a watch just like his. I know it wasn't him. Jack turned slightly, his gaze drifting past Ethan to the murmuring crowd. Rebecca stood slowly, placing a hand on Jack's arm. Her voice was gentle, firm. Jack, listen to him. Jack looked down at Ethan again, his eyes softening under the weight of the boy's raw, unfiltered hope. Ethan, I can't promise you anything. Ethan's shoulders drooped slightly, his fingers loosening around the backpack. But I can promise you this. I will look into it. Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes wide and wet. Really? Jack nodded once firmly. Really? Rebecca stepped forward, her gaze warm, her lips trembling as she smiled. You're so brave, Ethan. Don't lose that. Ethan swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. Thank you both. Jack reached into his pocket, pulling out a small notepad and pen. Tell me everything you know about that night. Every detail. Ethan inhaled shakily and began to speak. His words came in a rush, each sentence carrying pieces of memories he had guarded for so long. The creak of the front door, his father's quiet voice telling him good night, the watch left on the kitchen counter. Rebecca listened silently, her eyes occasionally flicking to Jack's face as he scribbled notes with precise, urgent strokes. When Ethan finished, he felt hollow and light all at once, as if a heavy stone had finally been lifted from his chest. Jack closed the notepad, meeting Ethan's gaze once more. We'll start here, and we'll see where it leads. Ethan nodded slowly, his breath coming out shaky, but his eyes shone with something new, a fragile, burning hope. Rebecca placed her hand on Ethan's shoulder, her voice soft. You've done more today than most grown men ever do in their whole lives. Ethan looked down, his fingers brushing over the watch in his pocket, feeling it pulse like a second heartbeat. For the first time in a long while, he let himself believe. Maybe, just maybe, justice could come home. Jack sat alone in his office long after the sun had disappeared behind the New York skyline. The city below glimmered like a restless sea, each light a silent witness to secrets that lived in the dark. He leaned back in his chair, Daniel Carter's thick case file spread open in front of him. The pages were yellowed at the edges, fingerprints smudged across photos, statements typed in rigid lines that felt as cold as steel bars. Jack flipped through the surveillance images again and again. In each blurry frame, a figure moved across the warehouse, a glint of metal on his wrist. A watch. Jack's pen tapped steadily against the desk, echoing through the empty room. He glanced at a photo clipped to the top of the file, Daniel's mugshot, tired eyes, heavy shoulders. A man swallowed by the system. The evidence looked solid on paper. A security video, testimony from a coworker. An access log showing Daniel's ID used that night. All so tidy. Too tidy. Jack's stomach turned as he thought of Ethan's trembling voice, the way the boy had held onto that old watch like it was the last star in a collapsing sky. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. Justice isn't something you wait for. It's something you fight for. Jack opened his eyes, steeling himself. He stood, grabbing the case file, and walked down the dimly lit hallway toward a heavy door marked Evidence Storage. He scanned his badge, pushed the door open, and stepped into the cold, sterile room. Rows of boxes lined the walls like silent graves. He pulled Daniel's evidence box off a shelf and set it on the table. Inside, a sealed plastic bag held a copy of the surveillance footage, a few documents, and a faded access card. Jack picked up the card, turning it slowly in his hands. Daniel Carter's name stamped neatly at the top. Jack frowned. Something felt wrong. The log said the card was used the night of the theft, but if Daniel left it at home... His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Lieutenant Mason stood there, his wide frame filling the doorway. What are you doing, Chief? Jack turned, keeping his voice calm, reviewing an old case. Mason stepped inside, his eyes sharp and cold. The Carter case, that's closed, evidence was clear. Jack didn't look away. Was it convenient? Mason's lips twitched into a tight smile. Be careful where you dig, Jack. Some graves hold things you don't want to find. Jack bristled, his jaw tightening. This isn't about graves. It's about a boy who believes his father is innocent. Mason stepped closer, lowering his voice. You want to risk your career over a kid's fantasy? We did what we had to do. The case is done. Move on. Jack studied Mason's face, watching the flicker of something, irritation, fear, or maybe guilt. I won't bury the truth because it's easier. Mason laughed once, dark and low. Truth? Or your version of it, don't forget who signs your paycheck, Jack. Mason turned sharply, the echo of his boots filling the room as he left. Jack stood still, the silence closing around him like a fist, his hand curled tighter around the access card. He walked back to his office and placed the card on his desk, next to the watch Ethan had given him earlier. He stared at them both, the pieces clicking together in his mind like shards of broken glass forming a clear picture. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. A text from one of the tech officers. Chief, I ran the card logs. The user ID doesn't match Daniel's. Someone cloned his card. Jack's pulse spiked. He called Ethan immediately. Meet me tomorrow. Bring anything else you have that belonged to your dad. That night, Jack sat at his desk long after the city fell asleep. His eyes burned from hours of searching, his mind replaying Mason's warning like a threat crawling through his veins. Outside his window, the city glowed beneath a blanket of secrets. Inside, Jack held Daniel's watch to his chest. In that quiet, he made a silent vow, to a boy he barely knew, to a man he'd never met, and to a justice he refused to let die. The morning sky hung low over Brooklyn, a blanket of gray pressing down on the narrow streets. Ethan stood at the bus stop, Daniel's watch heavy in his pocket, his breath turning to faint clouds in the cold air. Jack's text from the night before echoed in his head like a drumbeat. Meet me tomorrow. Bring anything else. Ethan felt the weight of those words deep in his chest, each heartbeat reminding him of how fragile hope could feel when you were 13, and the world had already taught you to expect disappointment. When he arrived at the precinct, Jack was waiting by the side entrance, his face drawn, his eyes sharp. He waved Ethan in quickly, his voice low. We have to be careful. People are watching. Ethan nodded, gripping his backpack tighter. Inside Jack's small office, the walls seemed to lean in, filled with papers and old photos that smelled of dust and secrets. Jack closed the blinds and motioned for Ethan to sit. Do you have anything else? Ethan slowly pulled out the access card, placing it next to the watch on the desk. My dad, he forgot to return this card the night before they arrested him. He said he left it at home. Jack picked up the card, turning it over, his brow furrowed. This might be the key. We confirmed someone used this card under a fake ID. Ethan watched Jack, his fingers twisting together in his lap. Will this help him? Jack paused, meeting Ethan's eyes. It's a start, but we need more. A soft knock interrupted them. Rebecca stepped inside, her eyes moving from the boy to Jack. She carried 2 coffee cups, setting one on the desk. Morning. You both look like you didn't sleep at all. Jack forced a small smile, taking the cup. We have a lead, but we need Paul Stanford. Rebecca frowned, glancing at Ethan. The witness, the one who testified against your dad. Ethan's shoulders tensed. Yes. Do you know where he is? Jack nodded. I tracked him down. But he refuses to talk. He's scared. Ethan's jaw tightened, his small hands curling into fists. Then let me talk to him. Jack and Rebecca exchanged a quick glance. Jack started to protest, but Rebecca put a hand on his arm. Let him try. Maybe Paul will listen to him. Later that afternoon, Jack drove Ethan to a crumbling apartment building on the edge of the neighborhood. The hallways smelled of mildew and forgotten lives. Paul opened the door a crack, his eyes wide when he saw Jack. I told you I don't want any trouble. Leave me alone. Ethan stepped forward before Jack could answer. Mr. Stanford, please. My name is Ethan, Daniel Carter's son. Paul flinched as if struck. His gaze flickered to Ethan's face, then to Jack. I can't, they'll hurt me. Ethan's voice broke as he spoke, but he didn't stop. They already hurt my dad, my mom, me. You know he didn't do it. You know the truth. Paul shook his head violently, his lips trembling. I can't. I didn't see anything that night. Mason made me say it. Paul's words crumbled into sobs. He stumbled back, sinking into a broken chair inside the dim room. Ethan stepped closer, his small voice cutting through the room like a blade. Please. You can stop it. You can help fix this. You're the only one who can. Paul covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. A long, heavy silence filled the air. Finally, he lowered his hands, his red eyes staring at Ethan. If I talk, I need protection. Jack stepped forward, his voice firm. You'll have it. I promise. Paul swallowed hard, nodding slowly. I lied. I never saw Daniel at the warehouse. Mason forced me. He said if I didn't, they'd come after my family. Ethan's breath hitched, his knees nearly giving way. Thank you, thank you. Paul reached out, his fingers shaking, and Ethan grabbed his hand tightly. I'll do it. I'll tell the truth. Just, please keep me safe. Jack nodded solemnly. You've taken the first step toward making things right. Paul leaned back, exhausted but somehow lighter, as if a stone had been lifted from his soul. Ethan turned to Jack, a spark of fierce determination in his eyes. We're going to save my dad. Jack placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, his grip strong and steady. Yes, we are. And in that crumbling room, surrounded by peeling paint and old ghosts, the first real crack appeared in the wall that had trapped Daniel Carter for so long. Jack stood in the precinct's hallway, the fluorescent lights above him flickering like a nervous heartbeat. In his hand, he held Paul's new signed statement, a single sheet of paper that could tear open the whole department. He felt the weight of it, heavier than any gun he had ever carried. When he stepped into his office, Mason was already there, lounging in Jack's chair with a lazy grin. You look tired, Chief. Maybe you should get some rest. Jack shut the door slowly, his eyes never leaving Mason's. We need to talk. Mason leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. About what a closed case or that boy's fairy tales? Jack stepped closer, dropping the statement on the desk. About the truth. Mason's eyes flicked to the paper. His smirk faltered for a second before snapping back into place. You're making a mistake. Jack's jaw clenched, his voice low and even. No, you did. When you framed an innocent man and used a child's life as collateral. Mason pushed himself up from the chair, his smile gone. Careful, Jack. You're digging into things that can bury you. Jack stepped forward until they were face to face, close enough to feel each other's breath. I'd rather be buried standing for the truth than live crawling under your lies. Mason's eyes darkened, his fists tightening at his sides. You think they'll believe a washed-up cop over me, over the department, you'll be finished. Jack didn't move. I don't care about my badge. I care about that boy, his father. The truth. Mason turned abruptly, slamming his fist into the file cabinet. Papers spilled across the floor. You don't get it, Jack. We did what we had to do. The department needed a win. Jack stared, his chest heaving. At what cost? A man's life, a boy's soul. Mason grabbed his coat, shoving past Jack toward the door. This isn't over. Jack watched him go, the room vibrating with the echo of Mason's anger. He knelt, picking up the scattered papers with shaking hands. Rebecca stepped in quietly, her eyes wide. Jack, he looked up at her, his face lined with exhaustion and fury. It's all true, Becky. He did it. She crossed the room in 2 quick strides, pulling him into her arms. Then we finish this. Together. Jack buried his face against her shoulder, the knot in his chest loosening for just a moment. Later that night, Jack gathered a small circle of trusted officers in a hidden conference room. They reviewed the evidence. Paul's confession, the access card logs, the surveillance footage inconsistencies. One officer spoke up, his voice tight. Chief, Mason has eyes everywhere. If he knows we're moving against him, he'll destroy everything. Jack nodded slowly, his eyes sharp and clear. That's why we move now, tonight. Rebecca squeezed his hand, her presence a silent anchor. Ethan sat in the corner, watching them, his small frame tense, his eyes fierce. We can't let him win, not again. Jack turned to him, a faint smile breaking through. You remind me of someone I used to be. Ethan stood, his hands balled at his sides. We have to do this for my dad. Jack nodded, his voice steady. For all the people who still believe in justice. In the deep silence that followed, they felt the shape of something larger than any single case. The heartbeat of a city that had been ignored, the whispers of the forgotten. Tonight, they would begin to tear down the wall. And for the first time, the air in that small room felt electric with possibility, like the first spark before a storm. The night felt heavier than usual, the sky a dark ocean pressing down on the rooftops of Brooklyn. Jack sat at his kitchen table, the dim light above him flickering as if sharing his unease. Rebecca stood by the sink, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug. Her eyes moved between Jack and the window, where shadows danced against the glass. "We're running out of time, Jack. Mason won't wait." Jack rubbed his temples, exhaustion bleeding into every line on his face. "I know, but we can't rush and risk losing Paul or the evidence." Rebecca set her mug down with a soft thud. "I keep thinking about Ethan. He's just a kid, Jack. A kid carrying more weight than most grown men ever will." Jack looked up, his eyes tired but burning with something deeper. "He's stronger than any of us realized." A soft knock broke the quiet. Jack tensed, reaching for his sidearm, but Rebecca moved first, opening the door just enough to see. Ethan stood there, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his hair damp from the drizzle outside. "Uncle Jack, I couldn't stay home. I need to help." Jack stared at him, torn between anger and admiration. "Ethan, you shouldn't be here. It's dangerous." Ethan stepped forward, his voice shaking but steady. "It's dangerous for everyone if we don't finish this. Please, I can help Paul. He trusts me." Rebecca placed a gentle hand on Jack's arm. "He's right. He's already in this deeper than anyone." Jack sighed, the fight draining from his shoulders. "All right. But you stay with me, no matter what." Ethan nodded fiercely, his eyes shining. "I promise." Hours later, they all gathered in Jack's basement office. Maps were spread across the table, strings of red yarn marking connections that only they understood. Paul sat in the corner, his knees bouncing, eyes darting to every small noise. Ethan moved to him slowly, crouching down so they were eye level. "Mr. Stanford, I'm here. You're not alone." Paul's breath stuttered, his fingers trembling. "They'll come for me. You don't know what they're capable of." Ethan shook his head, his hand hovering near Paul's. "I do. They came for my family. But we're still here, and we're going to finish this." Paul looked at Ethan, the fear in his eyes softening just enough to let a sliver of light through. Rebecca moved closer, her presence calm and steady. "We'll protect you. You have my word." Paul's head dropped forward as if the promise had broken some invisible chain around his neck. Jack leaned over the maps, his finger tracing a line toward Mason's known safe house. "He'll try to run tonight. We stop him before he disappears and before he can erase the last of the evidence." Rebecca checked her watch, her voice tight. "We have a window of maybe 2 hours. After that, he's gone." Jack looked at Ethan. "You stay with Paul. Keep him safe. No matter what happens, you do not leave this house." Ethan's chin lifted, his jaw set. "I won't fail you." Jack pressed a hand to Ethan's shoulder, a silent exchange of trust passing between them. Rebecca moved to the door, her badge tucked into her pocket, her eyes dark with focus. Jack took one last look at the people in the room, the fragile witness, the boy who had become the heart of this fight, and the woman who had always been his anchor. He nodded once, firmly. "Tonight it ends." As the door closed behind them, Ethan sat with Paul in the dim basement, the only sound the quiet hum of the city outside. Ethan's fingers brushed the old watch on his wrist, the metal warm against his skin. "We're almost there, Dad. I'm not letting go." In that small, hidden room, 2 people waited, one trying to hold his soul together, and the other, just a boy, burning brighter than any light outside. The rain came down in thin, cold sheets, washing the city in a ghostly glow under the streetlights. Jack stood in front of the precinct, the hood of his jacket pulled low over his face, water dripping from the edge. Rebecca stood beside him, her hair tied back, her eyes sharp and alive with the storm inside her. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice low. Jack nodded, his gaze fixed on the darkened building across the street, Mason's safe house. "We have to be. It's now or never." They crossed the street quietly, each footstep echoing off wet pavement. Rebecca kept her hand near her holstered weapon, her breathing slow and controlled. Inside the basement back home, Ethan sat with Paul, the dim light casting long shadows on the walls. Paul shivered, his hands wringing together so hard his knuckles turned white. "They're going to kill me. Kid, they're going to make me disappear." Ethan shook his head fiercely, leaning closer. "Number you're safe here. Jack and Rebecca will stop him. And when it's over, you'll finally be free." Paul's eyes darted around the room, haunted and wild. "How do you know? How can you be so sure?" Ethan touched the watch on his wrist, his voice strong even as his heart pounded. Because my dad taught me that no matter how dark it gets, there's always a light waiting. You just have to fight to reach it. Outside Mason's safe house, Jack and Rebecca crept up the back steps. Jack pushed open the door slowly, his breath catching as the hinges let out a small groan. Inside, Mason stood at a table covered in scattered documents and a half-packed bag. He looked up, startled, then smirked when he saw them. You just couldn't leave it alone, could you, Jack? Jack stepped forward, the rainwater dripping onto the floor around his boots. You took an innocent man's life and turned it into your own shield. You hurt a child. You don't get to run. Mason's eyes flickered to Rebecca, his smirk twisting into something uglier. And you brought your little sidekick, too, adorable. Rebecca drew her gun, her voice steady and cold. Drop it, Mason. It's over. Mason laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that echoed against the walls. Over, you really think the city cares about your noble little truth? You think anyone's going to thank you for this? Jack stepped closer, his voice quiet but cutting. I don't care who thanks me. I care about what's right. Mason lunged for a drawer, his fingers wrapping around a hidden pistol, but Rebecca fired first, the sharp crack splitting the silence like lightning. Mason fell back, the weapon clattering to the ground. He clutched his shoulder, snarling, You think this changes anything? Jack moved quickly, cuffing him, his hands sure and unshaking. It changes everything. Back at the basement, Ethan flinched at the echo of distant sirens growing louder outside. Paul looked at him, his voice a dry whisper. Is it done? Ethan listened, his hand on the watch, the ticking silence stretching between heartbeats. Yes, it's over. Paul broke down, sobs shuddering through him like an earthquake, his head falling into his hands. Ethan reached out, steadying him with a small, firm grip. Outside, Jack and Rebecca stood over Mason, the rain washing the blood from his hand into the gutter. Jack looked up at the sky, his face wet with rain and relief. He turned to Rebecca, his voice thick but clear. We did it. Rebecca lowered her weapon, her shoulders dropping as the weight of it all finally slipped away. Yes, we really did. As police cars pulled up and officers ran toward them, Jack looked into the distance, imagining Ethan's face, the boy's fierce eyes and quiet strength. Tonight, they didn't just stop a man. They cracked open the darkness, letting the first real light pour in. Morning crept over the city like a soft sigh, the first pale light glancing off rooftops and shimmering on rain-soaked streets. Ethan stood outside the courthouse, his fingers nervously twisting around the watch on his wrist. Helen stood beside him, her face drawn but determined, her hand gripping his shoulder with quiet strength. Inside, the hallways buzzed with reporters and murmurs, the air thick with anticipation and the weight of too many secrets finally ready to break free. Jack stood at the courtroom door, his eyes catching Ethan's as they entered. He gave a small nod, steady and reassuring. Today is the day, Ethan whispered, his voice barely rising above a breath. Today we bring Dad home. They walked inside together, the courtroom already filling with spectators and cameras. At the front, Daniel Carter stood between two guards, his wrists shackled, his shoulders hunched as if he carried the weight of every lie ever spoken about him. When his eyes found Ethan, they softened, lighting up with a fragile, almost childlike hope. Ethan pressed his palm to the glass barrier, and Daniel mirrored the motion, their fingers nearly touching. Jack stepped forward, papers clutched in one hand, his voice echoing through the silent room. Your Honor, today we present evidence of a grave injustice. We have proof that Daniel Carter was framed. We have the real witness testimony and forensic evidence confirming the access card was used by another man. Gasps rippled through the room. Daniel's head bowed, his chest shaking as if he were fighting the urge to collapse. Paul Stanford rose from his seat, every step heavy but certain. When he took the stand, the room went silent enough to hear each heartbeat. I lied. I never saw Daniel at the warehouse. I was threatened, forced to say those words. He is innocent. Daniel's knees buckled, and a guard quickly steadied him. Tears streamed down his face, each drop carrying years of silent suffering. Jack continued, laying out the timeline, the card logs, the manipulated footage, Mason's coercion. Every word hit like a hammer against the walls that had held Daniel prisoner. When Jack finally stepped back, The judge sat in long, heavy silence, her gaze moving between Daniel and the thick stack of evidence. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke, her voice steady and firm. Based on the new testimony and the evidence presented, this court hereby overturns the conviction of Daniel Carter. He is to be released immediately. A wave of cries and cheers flooded the room. Helen's hands flew to her mouth as tears spilled over, her knees giving out as she dropped to the bench. Ethan rushed to her, his arms wrapping around her as they wept together. The guards unlocked Daniel's cuffs. He stepped forward shakily, each movement like learning to walk again after years in darkness. Ethan broke free from his mother's embrace and ran to his father. Daniel fell to his knees, arms open, and Ethan crashed into him, their sobs blending into one voice that rose above the noise of the room. "You saved me, son, you saved me," Daniel whispered, his fingers gripping Ethan's shoulders as if afraid he might disappear. "I promised I wouldn't give up," Ethan gasped, tears streaking down his cheeks. Jack stood nearby, Rebecca at his side, their hands clasped. Rebecca leaned her head against Jack's shoulder, her eyes wet with relief. Helen joined them, falling into Daniel's arms, her voice a broken chant of gratitude and love. Around them, cameras flashed, reporters shouted, but for that moment they were alone in their small, quiet circle of victory and forgiveness. Ethan pulled back just enough to look into his father's eyes, his voice soft but strong. "Welcome home, Dad." Daniel pressed his forehead to Ethan's, his breath hitching. "I'm home because of you." And in that crowded courtroom, under harsh fluorescent lights and echoing footsteps, one family found its way back to the light, holding on to each other like the only truth that ever mattered. Sunlight spilled across the narrow kitchen table, painting golden streaks over mismatched mugs and chipped plates. Daniel sat there, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee as if it were the most precious thing he had ever held. Ethan moved around the kitchen, humming softly, his fingers brushing the edges of old photos pinned to the fridge. Each picture told a story, some of laughter, some of silent prayers whispered into the night. Helen stood at the stove, her face softer now, the weight that had once carved deep lines into her expression slowly dissolving. She turned, catching Daniel's gaze. "You look like you finally slept," she teased, her voice light but trembling at the edges. Daniel laughed, a sound that filled the small kitchen like warm music. First real sleep in years. "I keep waking up, thinking it's a dream." Ethan stepped closer, placing the repaired watch on the table in front of Daniel. "It's fixed, Dad, just like us." Daniel picked it up carefully, turning it over in his hands as if it might vanish if he looked away. "This watch, it was my promise to you, and you kept yours to me." Ethan's eyes glimmered as he met his father's gaze. "We keep each other going." Later that week, Daniel started his new job at the precinct as a maintenance worker. It wasn't a glamorous title, but to him, each squeaky mop stroke felt like freedom, every hallway a small victory reclaimed. Officers passed him with hesitant smiles, some nodding respectfully, others avoiding his eyes, all aware of the truth now exposed. Meanwhile, Helen found a new job at a small community office, her evenings free for the first time in years. She began cooking dinners again, simple meals that tasted like forgiveness and second chances. Ethan's story traveled fast. The local paper ran a front-page story titled "The Boy Who Brought His Father Home," accompanied by a photo of Ethan gripping his father's hand in the courtroom. Neighbors stopped him on the street, calling him a hero. Kids from his school ran up to ask questions, wide-eyed and hopeful. One afternoon, as Ethan walked home, a younger boy stepped out from behind a lamppost, his voice shy. "I want to be like you one day. Can you teach me?" Ethan knelt, his hand resting gently on the boy's shoulder. "You can be even better than me. Just promise to always fight for what's right." The boy nodded, eyes wide and shining, before running off down the block. That evening, the Carter family gathered around their small table. Helen lit a candle, her hands steady. Daniel leaned back, watching Ethan with quiet pride. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice deeper somehow, carrying the echo of all they had survived. "I've decided I want to help people like us, people who can't fight alone. I want to be a lawyer." Daniel reached across the table, gripping Ethan's hand. You'll be the kind of lawyer this world truly needs. One who remembers where he came from. Helen's eyes brimmed with tears, her smile bright as morning sun. We'll be with you every step, Ethan, always. Ethan glanced down at the watch on his wrist, its hands ticking steadily forward. We made it here together, and I'll carry us forward. That night, as the city lights blinked against the dark sky, Ethan stood by his window, breathing in the cool, quiet air. He pressed his hand against the glass, feeling the gentle thrum of life outside. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new lessons, but tonight they had each other. And for the first time, that was enough. Years drifted by like quiet ripples on a moonlit lake, each one carrying Ethan closer to the promise he had made at that kitchen table. At 23, Ethan stood in front of a small, sunlit office in Brooklyn, the words Carter Legal Aid carved into the wooden sign above the door. His father's watch rested on his wrist, its ticking pulse steady as his own heartbeat. Inside, the walls were lined with photos, not of celebrities or trophies, but of families, small victories, smiling faces that had once looked hopeless. Each one a story he had touched. Daniel visited often, now retired from the precinct maintenance job. He liked to fix loose doorknobs or replace flickering light bulbs, always finding ways to keep the place whole. Helen brought lunch every Friday, filling the office with the smell of warm bread and spiced soup, her laughter echoing down the narrow hallway. One afternoon, Noah, a young man with wide eyes and a quiet intensity, knocked on Ethan's door. "Mr. Carter, I read about you when I was a kid. I just passed the bar exam. I want to work here. I want to fight beside you." Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying Noah's nervous hands, the tremor in his voice that reminded him so much of himself. "Justice doesn't wait for us to feel ready," Ethan said softly. "It needs us to stand up even when we're scared. Are you ready for that?" Noah lifted his chin, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am." Ethan stood, offering his hand. "Welcome home." Outside, the neighborhood had changed, small murals and gardens blooming where cracked walls once stood. On the side of a nearby building, a new mural towered Ethan, his arm raised high, a bright light spilling from his palm, the words beneath it bold and clear. "Justice is not given. It is built." Later that evening, Ethan received a letter from the Global Justice Initiative. "Your work has inspired not just a city, but a movement. We invite you to join our advisory board, to take your fight beyond these streets and into the world." Ethan held the letter for a long time, the edges softening under his fingertips. That night, he called a meeting at the office. His team, young lawyers, volunteers, students, crowded into the small space, their eyes shining with curiosity and belief. "I've been given an offer to help people in places most of us have never seen. But I won't abandon this home. We'll build something that can't be torn down, no matter where I go." Claire, a bright-eyed attorney, stepped forward, her voice strong. "We'll carry your light here, Ethan. You've already taught us how." Ethan felt a warmth spread through him, deeper than any courtroom victory. The next week, he stood in front of the mural, fingers brushing against the painted lines of his own face. A young boy tugged at his sleeve, wide-eyed. "Is it true? Did you really save your dad?" Ethan knelt, smiling gently. "Yes, but I didn't do it alone." The boy's eyes grew big as he whispered, "I want to be brave like you." Ethan placed a hand over the boy's heart. "You already are, just keep listening to this." As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in molten gold and soft violets, Ethan turned to see Jack and Rebecca standing at the edge of the street. Jack's eyes gleamed with pride, Rebecca's hand resting lightly on his arm. "You didn't just save your father," Jack called out. "You saved all of us." Ethan's chest tightened, his voice catching as he answered. "No, we did it together." With each step he took after that day, across new borders, into new battles, beside new families, Ethan carried Brooklyn with him. The watch ticked on his wrist, whispering stories of faith and fight, of love that refused to yield. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was a bridge, a seed planted in every place where hope felt impossible. And long after his footprints faded from the streets of Brooklyn, his light remained, a reminder that justice, real justice, is not found waiting in courtrooms. It is built, moment by moment, in the quiet hearts brave enough to believe.